The Daily Beast is out with a new op-ed targeting Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, and other so-called, quote, apocalyptic centrists. The author writes, the grandiosity of the conspiracy theories pushed by Musk and his cohort, which include hugely popular and influential intellectual dark web commentators like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, are what make them exceptional. These aren't goofy UFO conspiracy theories. This is serious stuff. The kind of stuff that would make you crazy enough to sack the Capitol, threaten the life of the Vice President and Speaker of the House, and think you're the good guy.
MSNBC host Mehdi Hasan celebrated the piece, tweeting, "Very good piece on the allure and appeal of conspiracy theories online." More hating on Elon Musk and Joe Rogan, which is a substitute for personality for some mainstream media mouthpieces these days. Never any self-reflection on all the conspiracy theories that they and their publications have bought into for years, relating to COVID, relating to Russiagate. No apology, no admittance of wrongdoing. It's all, you're a conspiracy theorist. Yes, admittedly, some of the things that Elon Musk has tweeted have turned out to be wrong. He tweets way too much. He buys into some stuff that I think is wrong, but they act like that he's the only first person to say something or express an idea that's wrong. Same thing of Joe Rogan, who platforms all sorts of people from all corners of the political spectrum. Some I think, again, are wrong, some I disagree with, but they have a desire to suppress this. It's threatening to them.
Yeah, of course, that's true. I think this piece differs from some others because it is trying to wrestle with the appeal of some shows that obviously many liberal commentators like Mehdi Hasan have a distaste for. But instead of writing it off as insignificant, completely fringe, it actually gives some respect to it, saying it's not like some fringe UFO conspiracy theory. It is at least trying to wrestle with why so much of this stuff is appealing. Now, my argument would be that when you live in a world where there really are huge moneyed institutions that spend so much of their time trying to exploit the public, extract wealth from the working class, change our legal system so that the laws and codes and tax systems and legal liability structures benefit people who have amassed a great deal of wealth to the detriment of the working class, then the line between what is in fact a conspiracy theory and reality is in fact narrow. When you live in a world where we've had so many mistakes made around COVID, the Tuskegee experiments, any number of medical malpractice, the thalidomide, the baby powder lawsuits, Vioxx, over the course of American history, of course people are going to be skeptical of the pharmaceutical industry, and they should. Not just for those kinds of pointed moments of malfeasance, but because it's a for-profit industry that puts its own profits before the health of the American public, and it should really be scrutinized. And so I do think it is a step in the right direction for people to be asking questions, for mainstream liberal publications to be, and mainstream conservative publications to be asking questions about why so many people are drawn to spaces where they don't feel so much pressure to conform with the kind of bog party standard line, whether it's about military interventionism, public health, or race or some other things. But I also do think it's worth having a conversation about what it means if the door is open, because there really are real conspiracies in the world that need to be talked about. What does it mean when you get to the point where a shooter says that he's interested in Tim Pool? Tim Pool not only denies the relationship, or denies, as he should, say, I don't support a shooting, but goes on to instead say, was the person even really into me? Was this person even really a Nazi? He was covered in these tattoos that the local police department have reported, really confirmed were there in fact. And you have these kind of spirals of conspiracy theories where it's much more attenuated from reality. And it does seem to be shielding a certain kind of hateful ideology that everyone kind of in the public knows you can't openly say, like, Nazis are bad. Nazis are good. But you do have people in these spaces saying things like, well, they're just trying to make him into a Nazi to make us look bad. Well, who's the us? You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean, there are examples of that happening. The Jared Loughner shooting of Gabrielle Giffords is a great example where that was chalked up to the shooter having seen a target over the Sarah Palin
right.
Target thing, which was totally made up by the media. She actually later sued the New York Times over it.
That
they
is
got it so wrong.
absolutely true. That happened. Let me ask you this. Does the fact of that having happened before mean that every Nazi that shoots someone now we're supposed to argue that they're not a Nazi?
No.
So that's the point. Like, there's all of this whataboutism, like this happened this time, this, like, I think that every case should be investigated and people should look. But when you have a picture of a decedent with a tattoo on their hand that's publicly available, and then a picture of the decedent while alive having just gotten his tattoos, and the tattoos match up, and the conservative police department in a conservative locality in Texas affirms that the person is covered in swastika tattoos, you don't have to buy into the idea that he is a quote-unquote white supremacist. If you think Nazis weren't white supremacists, that's your battle. Go fight it on the internet. I have no interest in fighting with you. But we do live in a world where I think legitimate concerns about all the ways that we've been misled by the mainstream media, et cetera, have gotten to a place where it's very 1984. It's like, are you going to believe your eyes that are seeing the evidence on the screen, or are you going to believe some other voices that say, no, your eyes aren't telling you the truth about the literal inked pictures on a shooter's body?
You bring this one up a lot. This seems to have really gotten under your skin.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like Nazism, and it concerns me a great deal. What?
Well, no one does.
Well, if someone said, hey, I'm doing something on behalf of Briahna Joy Gray, and I am a Nazi, it would be so easy for me to say, whoa, that sucks. Nazism is terrible. I don't condone any of that behavior and also that underlying belief system. But that is not, in fact, what has been happening with the Allen shooter. And I bring it up because it's not just some niche internet thing. Tim Pool is an enormously popular commentator. And this was one where Elon Musk, the richest man in the world and the owner of Twitter, weighed in and seemed to corroborate the theory, saying something along the lines of, interesting, in the way that he does under the tweet thread, seeming to lend a lot of credibility to the theory that despite report after report and weeks that have now gone by since the shooting, that this person was not, in fact, emblazoned with Nazi insignia. So I don't know. That does not feel significant to you? Is that not disturbing to you that we live in a world where kind of that sort of unsubstantiated, instinctive questioning of whether or not someone who's self-identified as a Nazi really is a Nazi feels like a shift away from, I think, some really healthy skepticism that's been happening over the last few years?
I mean, I think about it similarly with Elon had earlier tweeted that maybe there's more to this story about the Paul Pelosi attacker, which it very quickly turned out that it was a crazy person trying to get in there and actually attacked him. Yeah. And there really isn't anything ambiguous about it once you watch the police footage. So that was just asking questions that turned out to be not fruitful, not productive, and that happens. And this sounds like another case of that. But I don't. Do I think it's like the most significant development or goof of all time? No, especially in a media ecosystem, again, where mainstream people make substantial, who have the proper supposedly the training of journalists and editors and all of that, and get fundamental, important, massive stories wrong, and then wonder why there's no longer trust in them. I mean, you were talking about the moneyed interests. I mean, the Daily Beast, whose article we're kicked off this segment, is owned by a media conglomerate, IAC. Mehdi Hasan, who thinks this is a great article, it's MSNBC, which is owned by what? Comcast. Yeah,
the Daily Beast certainly isn't my paper of choice or paper of record, and I have some critiques of this article as well.
So they're making fun of people who have a perspective outside their own, who have questioned and sometimes got it right and sometimes got it wrong, which is more than you can say for them.
No, I think you can also say that MSNBC has sometimes got it right and sometimes got it wrong. Everybody sometimes gets it right and sometimes gets it wrong. That's the facts. Now, you can say that people disproportionately are skewed in one direction or another, and et cetera. And I think that's also a fair complaint. I sit here every single day on my podcast and elsewhere doing media criticism of liberal media, a liberal media that has personally attacked me in ways the conservative media never has, and who I feel a lot of frustration with, for sure. But I am also frustrated with people running cover for self-described Nazis on the internet. And I think that we can all have both of those things in our heads at the same time. I am a little frustrated that there's this kind of deflection that happens, in my view, whenever we start to talk about, I sit here and I'm very open to criticize my team, as it were. I'm critical of Bernie Sanders, I'm critical of Marianne Williamson, I'm critical of liberals who I don't consider to be on my team, as it were, but are much closer to me ideologically than, let's say, Republicans. But when it comes time to not just criticize a conservative, But someone who is literally running cover for a self-described Nazi, I feel like there's a necessary amount of tension and pushback, and I'm not saying with you in particular, Robby, but generally speaking on the internet, there doesn't seem to be that same openness to freedom of thought, ideas, self-criticism, and honesty that some corners of the internet really pride themselves as having had. So I do think there needs to be skepticism. I think the article is good in investigating why skepticism is so popular. I think skepticism is a good thing, but I do think it should be applied in an even way, and that we should all be able to reflect on ways in which our own defensiveness about media bias sometimes obscures
definitely
what's happening.
Apply skepticism. I mean, we're critical of. I'm critical of. I don't like you. I don't know exactly how you consider, if you consider yourself part of the Democratic Party or not. I don't really consider myself part of the Republican Party like you and your party. So I'm very critical of it and Trump, and which I've recognized that the ideological coalition that has dominated the Republican Party, with some exceptions on foreign policy, is actually kind of anathema to my own ideas, and I've been criticizing it for that direction. I think you get a lot of criticism of, I guess, both parties and both media ecosystems. Maybe we're more critical of the mainstream media ecosystem because we consider ourselves not part of it.
But
equally,
don't you think that these independent
But I don't think anyone would watch our show and think we've been overly kind to Elon Musk.
No, I'm not talking. I specifically said I'm not talking about you or this show. I'm talking about look. There are problems with corporate media, with mainstream establishment media. You can address some of those problems by going independent, but there are additional separate problems with independent media, including absolutely no oversight and no kind of structural liability when people start to say things that are patently false. Tim Pool has been connected to this particular shooter. This shooter liked Tim Pool. Now, that's not Tim Pool's fault necessarily. People like who they like. The guy maybe also liked to watch Succession. Doesn't mean it's Succession's fault that he murdered people so heinously. But when someone is saying, hey, I like you, I like your ideology, I think that what you're saying is making me, those kinds of things. And the response is, okay, but do we really know that he was a Nazi? And not, oh my gosh.
Okay. Do we really know that he's a Nazi is an unhelpful framing. I agree. There are, if you put a Nazi tattoo on yourself, like, I might also wonder, what else has gone wrong with you? What are you a crazy person? You've studied, like, you've sat down with Mein Kampf, you're an expert, you've committed yourself to the tenets of furthering Nazism, and now you're implementing phase one, which is to do a bunch of violent crime and murder. Do you know what I'm saying? There's not a necessary, I think people who are damaged, deranged, and crazy seek out validating extremist.
This is about Tim Pool and Elon Musk's response to the shooter. So I know everyone wants to go and have a conversation about mental health and what caused the shooter to shoot. We're talking right now about a media criticism article. And we're talking about these media figures' response, the owner of Twitter and a major podcaster's response to learning about a shooter's ideology. Their response was to try to cast doubt on that the shooter, in fact, had that ideology, because their perception was that if the shooter had that Nazi ideology, it would make them look bad. Now, why would you think that someone who had a Nazi ideology makes you look bad?
Because they're trying to tar those people, Tim Pool and Elon Musk, as Nazis.
Well, Elon Musk volunteered himself into it by weighing in. So really, he made the choice to piggyback on Tim Pool's obstruction campaign, attempt to obscure what was going on there. Tim Pool, like I said, I don't know, I've said this a million times, I don't want to belabor the point. You can just say I'm not a Nazi and I don't like that and move on. And then people piling on him would be in bad faith.
But we're trying to probe motives. The motives of the mainstream media people is to say Nazism is rising because Tim Pool is allowed to speak and we need to shut him down to prevent Nazi violence everywhere.
Isn't it possible just to disagree with that? Can I sit here and say, I think that some of the reports about the rise of Nazism are overstated, or a rise of white supremacy. I think others are very much true, and the people are in denial. But I think that You shouldn't preemptively prevent people absent much higher standard, a much higher First Amendment standard, from being able to talk and be on social media apps, et cetera. In fact, it's another thing I've criticized Elon Musk for. When he kicked Kanye West off the platform, I have defended Kanye West despite thinking his tweets were abhorrent. His swastika tweet, I think, was not in violation of Twitter's policy. So I am consistently criticizing all of these figures for violating these free speech principles. I also am criticizing Tim Pool's choice here to, instead of distancing himself from someone who's a self-identified Nazi, trying to frankly lie about the relationship, about the identity, the self-described, well-corroborated, well-documented political choices of that shooter. And I think that's a problem in addition to anybody who's trying to do
But I didn't say otherwise. It sounds like, again, I think you're arguing against some maybe people online who are doing that. I said that wasn't a good move for them because it seems pretty obvious that this person does actually have a Nazi tattoo, and I
Robby,
believe what the fan was.
A few minutes ago, you said, well, this seems to be you bring that up a lot. This seems to be a focus up for you a lot. So I'm explaining to you why I come back to it.
Every time you brought it up, I've said, yeah, seems like a Nazi. That was a bad move. That was just wrong to say that, to suggest that it was fabricated or something.
Yeah, so, but it's, again,
so we're not arguing.
No, but it's about Tim Pool, and I'm bringing that as an example. So if you agree with me that it is wrong of Tim Pool to have taken that position, that the kind of a world of skepticism that leads people to not believe their eyes in a context like that is a problem.
Skepticism that the photos were doctored, it was not accurate, or healthy.
Well, it was, just to be really clear, what was so bizarre about it is that we knew this shooter. There were tattoos. 5 times we talked about it. There are tattoos on this deceased shooter.
Right.
The tattoos, pictures of the tattoos are of him alive, sometime in the past. Right. We know that he's alive in the photos. It seems like he took the photos right after he got the tattoo, because that's oftentimes when people take their shirt off and document what they've just done.
I didn't get out my magnifying glass and Sherlock Holmes this. The local sheriff said the guy has the tattoos, so I believe that he has the tattoos.
Close the loop. Because the picture of the tattoos that was very clear with him shirtless was an older picture, people were saying, well, the tattoos are fresh, as though that's a photo of him after he perpetrated the event or just before he did the shooting. So again, there's a certain kind of very obvious lack of logic to some of these conspiracy theories that people like Elon Musk are falling for. And yet, because of the environment, getting back to the article, because of the environment that we're in addition to really good things that people should be skeptical about rising to the top, some kind of bizarre stuff is rising to the top. And I do think that we're going to have to continue to have a national conversation about how to tease out those different kinds of stories and make sure that I think a healthy environment of skepticism isn't used to advance, I think, ideologies that are very pernicious and hateful. That's all.
They should have said, the mainstream people should have said, the idea that he has Nazi tattoos is Russia-originated misinformation, and then everyone would accept that he has Nazi tattoos. So that would obviously not be true. Okay, more rising after this.